Thank you so much for inviting me back. I'm happy to be again at Tibetan Buddhist with all of you. Thank you for joining me this evening. It's morning here for me, so nice and early. It's 7:30, so it's actually a good time. I'm very happy to be back. When Venerable Dundrup asked if requested me to return, and he suggested this topic, I thought it was a great idea. So the topic, this idea of taking the essence of Buddhist ethics in the modern world, and then we're going to cover over 4 weeks. So today we're talking about how to think about karma in the modern world and in our everyday life. So that'll be the topic. And then going through the next couple of weeks, we're talking about the Bodhisattva Ideal, as well as ethical precepts and vows, and then lastly, mindfulness and awareness, and how all of those relate to the idea of a Buddhist ethical life in the modern world. So I'm excited for you to join me. All four of these classes kind of build on one another, but they're separate at the same time. So they work together, but they're separate. So hopefully you can join me for all of them. I look forward to it. Before we begin, let's just take a moment, wherever we are, to settle our minds and bodies and recognize that although we may be at home, we may be in our living room, watching on a TV screen or a phone or a laptop, try to visualize in front of you that you're actually in a gompa or a teaching hall or a temple or some kind of sacred place. Because we're about to study the teachings of the Buddha together. And to do so, we should have an environment that's equally sacred and not simply the mundane environment where we go about our worldly activities. So no matter where we are, we can bring that sacred space with us whenever we receive teachings or we receive instruction or even have Dharma conversations. And it's always useful when you have any sort of level of instruction happening to visualize whoever's giving the instruction or the teaching, whether they're a lay person or a monk or a nun, whether they are actually your teacher or just a Dharma friend, like me in this case. Visualize them on a teaching throne and not for their benefit, especially for someone like me with very little intelligence and even fewer good qualities. Being visualized on a teaching throne doesn't help me at all. But what it does is it helps set your mind in the recognition that what they're speaking, what they're explaining, what they're sharing are the words of the Buddha Dharma. That's the actual refuge. And so to generate faith and respect in the actual refuge, the teachings of the Buddha, anyone that is explaining them, we visualize them in a slightly elevated position, not in respect to them, but in respect to the teaching itself. So take a moment to bring yourself into that sacred space and allow your worldly space around you to dissolve and become a teaching ground, whatever that may look like for you. And we'll set a strong motivation that we've come together this evening, not simply to benefit ourselves, not simply to find happiness and peace in this life, but so that we might be of maximum benefit to other sentient beings. We recognize that the best way to help others is to ourselves become a Buddha. So we have that as our priority, our main goal, achieving Buddhahood, because then we'll have the level of wisdom and skillful means to be of maximum benefit. And in the process, as we develop peace and happiness in this life, we strive to make this life meaningful. We recognize that in this life, there are many ways we can help sentient beings. And so our study and our discussion here together this evening is all done for that purpose, so that we might develop wisdom and understanding. We might develop the skill and method to practice the Dharma in our lives, so that we might be of maximum benefit. So setting this strong motivation, we'll offer this verse of refuge and bodhicitta 3 times. In the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To it all may I become Buddha in the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha. Until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To it all may I become Buddha in the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha. Until enlightened I seek refuge through merit from giving and the rest. To it all may I become Buddha. Great. Thank you. So again, thank you for being here with me this evening. I'm very happy to be here. I was very excited when this topic was suggested as a series, because I think what's critical for us as practitioners is to learn what it means to take these teachings that are so valuable and precious and incorporate them into every aspect of our life. So when this was suggested and these 4 topics were suggested, I thought it was a great opportunity, a great idea. So I look forward to being with you the next 4 weeks. As we begin any Dharma practice, any type of study, it's critical to adopt 3 attitudes. The first attitude is the long view, or the attitude of the big picture, which is the recognition that our goal is Buddhahood, which is a long way away, but that is the main practice. So everything we do are working towards Buddhahood. It's working towards taking the Buddha nature we all have, developing it, ripening it fully, and allowing the Buddha that we all have the capacity to be, to flourish, to grow, and exist in this world in a meaningful way. So all of our actions should be pointed towards Buddhahood. And as we begin any new study, we keep that in mind. Then the next attitude we have to adopt, in addition to the long view, is what's called the extensive attitude. And this is the recognition that the teachings of the Buddha are very broad and vast, and there are a lot of different subjects to study. There are a lot of different topics to cover. And so it may seem at times like our mind is going all over the place, like we never are able to cover everything. Like this is just too much information. And so we have to keep in mind that these are all small pieces of the bigger picture, which is quite vast and expansive. So we can study one particular topic, and then as we develop some competency or familiarity with that topic, then we can combine it with other topics and incorporate them all together. But we have to have this vast view, the recognition that there are lots of different pieces of this practice that we have to put together slowly. And that's complemented by the final attitude we should adopt whenever we engage in study or practice, which is the relaxed attitude, or the relaxed view, which is the recognition that if we push too hard, we're just going to burn out, that everything has to be at an appropriate pace so we don't become overwhelmed internally or physically. So we need to find a balance. So even though our goal is Buddhahood, which may seem incredibly distant in the future, and even though there are many disparate parts that we have to pull together and learn separately and then combine, so there's a lot of work. Even though we know all of that, we have to have a mind of relaxation that approaches the Dharma with calm, with peace, and with joy, so that our practice doesn't become overwhelming, but instead becomes enriching, and makes our lives more meaningful, because that's the goal. So if we find ourselves pushing too hard, then we relax a bit, which isn't to say that we're lazy. It's just recognizing that we have to have limits and boundaries, which we can always be pushing against a little bit, moving them forward slowly, but ultimately we have to be relaxed in our approach. So as we begin this topic, keeping those 3 attitudes in mind, for me, I think the most critical question we have to ask ourselves is, what do we mean when we say practice, Dharma practice? This idea that we study the teachings, whether it's the Lamrim or Lojong or Tantra or any of the teachings of the Buddha, and then we have a practice of the Dharma. What does that mean? I think for many people, what first comes to mind when they say my practice is whatever specific meditations we do every day. So maybe every day I meditate for 30 minutes and then I do 30 minutes of prayers or, deity, sadhanas, things like this. We think of that as my practice. Or I go to teachings once a week or twice a week. That's my practice. Those aren't wrong. They're a part of practice, but it's not the whole picture. The big picture is that every moment of our life is our practice. It's not just when you're in the Gompa, or not just when you're receiving a teaching or sitting on a meditation cushion. Those are the easy parts of practice. The real practice is when you're going about your worldly life every day. The real practice is when you're dealing with family, friends, co-workers, difficult people, joyful people. When you're looking at the news and seeing awful things happening in the world. That is your practice. Because that's when the Dharma matters most, when you're able to apply it. And so at first, when we study these teachings, applying them in our everyday life, it takes effort, right? Because we're not used to this way of thinking. It hasn't become familiar enough to our mind. So at first, we have to be we become very conscientious of applying the teachings to our experiences. And then slowly, as we do that more and more, it becomes our second nature. And so the idea of Buddhist practice being every moment of my life isn't something we have to think about. Because we already have the knowledge and the experience of the topics of the Dharma, so that when anything arises in our life, it instantly becomes part of our practice. And we instantly engage with a Buddhist understanding of how my experience fits into the world and how it can affect my mind. So what we need to do is, as they say, whenever you study, we go through these three phases of first studying or listening, and then contemplating, and then meditating. So in this case, study is when you engage in a new topic, when you engage in any Dharma material. That's the active process of learning new things, of attending a teaching or reading a Dharma book. That's study, or hearing, it's sometimes called. And then contemplation is when we actually think about what we're studying. We look in our minds and see, do we have any doubts? Do we have conviction? What are concerns? How does this apply to my life? Those are that type of analysis we call contemplation. And then lastly is meditating. So once we have some conviction and whatever the Dharma topics are, we bring that into our meditation. And our meditation is a way to make these Dharma topics inseparable from our mind. Right? In Tibetan, the word to meditate is gom. That's where the word gompa comes from. And gom means to become familiar with something. So when we meditate, what we're doing is becoming familiar with our mind, and we're becoming familiar with whatever meditative topic we are exploring. And by doing so, we make it inseparable from our mind. So if you continually meditate on compassion, generating that compassion in your meditation and on your meditation cushion, the purpose of that is so that your mind becomes inseparable from compassion. So when you're off the meditation cushion, you have that compassion all the time. And at first, it's something you have to think about, you have to put effort in, but the more you make that mind of compassion inseparable from your own mind, of one nature with your mind, then you don't have to think about it. It becomes your first instinct. So we have to go through these three processes of study, contemplating, and meditating on all the different Dharma topics in order to make them inseparable from our mind. And in so doing, we make them part of every moment of our experience. The idea that study and practice are separate is something we have to get rid of. We have to kind of destroy this duality that says, I have my times of study or meditation, and then I have my everyday life, right? Because study itself is a type of practice, and it also informs our practice and makes our practice stronger, but it isn't the limit of our practice. Our practice has to be everything we experience in our lives. If I can be a great Buddhist for an hour a day while I'm meditating, but then I'm an awful person the rest of the day, then that doesn't do me a whole lot of good, right? So the heart of these courses we'll be studying together the next 4 weeks is to look at some specific topics that the Buddha taught and to see how, when we develop some conviction in them and some understanding of them, then they can inform everything we do, every interaction we have, every moment of our life becomes our Dharma practice, not just the moments that we section off to attend a teaching or to meditate, you know? So that's the goal. of our time together today, to look at these topics and to destroy this duality between the time of study or meditation and the time of practice and everyday life. They all have to be unified. And the truth is, for most of us, applying most of these teachings in our everyday life can be difficult because it's somewhat confrontational, because we're not used to it. We're used to chasing all of the pleasures of samsara, right? We're used to experiencing our emotions and our experiences of the world and believing that they truly exist the way we experience them and reacting like that without thinking of the Dharma teachings, without thinking of the instruction of the Buddha. So our worldly reactions are comfortable to us because that's our habit. So to confront our habits, all of our worldly habits, our destructive minds, our ignorance, can be frightening, and it can be a lot of work. So we take it slowly, and we do work on both sides. We do the work on the study side by building up our confidence, our understanding, our knowledge, and then incorporating that into meditation practice so it becomes of one nature with our mind. And then we do work on the everyday life side, where slowly we incorporate that into our life. At first with a lot of effort, and at first with some difficulty, but as we practice, it becomes easier. So the topic that we wanted to explore today is the idea of karma. And karma is a critical topic. Pabon Rinpoche says, being a great scholar or a great yogi has no benefit at all if you don't have confidence or faith in karma. So just knowledge alone, or just the ability to engage in some meditative absorption, that doesn't benefit you if you don't have faith in karma or confidence or understanding of karma. And the reason is because karma is really understanding karma, knowledge of karma, and then applying that is the root of all of our happiness. It's the root of how we develop a meaningful life, because it guides our actions as well as explains our situation. So what is karma, right, to start with? So we have different types of karma: karma of body, speech, and mind. What the word karma means in Tibetan and in Sanskrit, in Tibetan it's the word lay. In Sanskrit, obviously, karma, it actually means action, right? So we see this word used in different contexts because it means action or activity. But here, so we can keep that in mind, all of our actions of body, speech, and mind are accompanied by a different karma, right? And the reason for that is that we're creating mental karma all the time. We say every single mind that we have, every experience of mental activity has at least these, what are called the 5 omnipresent mental factors. So every mind, whether it's a mind of realization or a mind of sleep or a correct mind, an incorrect mind, every mind we have is accompanied by these 5 components at the base, at the minimum. And these 5 mental factors or components, one of them is discrimination, the ability to recognize an object. One of them is sometimes called concentration or attention. And this is the ability to focus on an object. And there's one called contact, which is the actual mind engaging with an outside object or an object other than itself. And there's one called feeling, which is the feeling of either pleasure, displeasure, or neutrality with regard to that contact. And then lastly, there is the mental factor, sometimes called intention or urge. This is karma. This is a mental karma. So every single one of our minds is accompanied by this karma, which is why mental actions are so powerful, which is why taking vows is so powerful, right? Because every action of our body or our speech is preceded by an action of mind. So we have these different types of karma: body, speech, and mind. And every action of our mind, every mental event is itself associated with a karma. It doesn't always necessarily mean a powerful karma, but there's some karma with every mental event. And it's probably useful to distinguish, at least for an academic level. We use the word karma quite freely. What we need to distinguish a little bit between karma and a karmic imprint, right? So karma only lasts for the duration of that action, whether it be a mental action or a physical or spoken action. The karma itself lasts for the duration of that, but its immediate result is a karmic imprint. So those karmic imprints are what ripen in the future. So we say it's my karma ripening, and what we're really talking about is the karmic imprints that were left by the karma, by the action itself. So even in the texts, the word karma is used often to mean karmic imprint, unless you're actually studying what it means to develop those karmic imprints and then to purify them and so forth. But in general, when we talk about karma, we're probably referencing the karmic imprint. It's easier just to say karma, but recognize there's a little bit difference. So, karma itself isn't always negative, right? We have virtuous karma, then we have negative karma, we have neutral karma. And karma itself comes in different strengths, So in order to have an understanding of karma, it's important to see what different types of karma they are, then what kind of actions create that karma explicitly, and what are the different ways that a karma is recognized as stronger or weaker. So the first thing to think about is the different types of karma. And so these are sometimes divided into three. The first is what's called projecting karma or throwing karma. And this is a karmic imprint that causes us to have a specific type of rebirth in one of the 6 realms of existence. So the karma that ripens into me being reborn as a human is called a throwing karma. And then there's a type of karma called environmental karma. This is a type of completing karma. And so what this is it's the karma that ripens about the environment in which I am born, the situation, whether I am born in a country that is hospitable to my practice or to my long life, or whether I'm born in a situation where I don't have access to food or shelter and so forth. This is the ripening of karma. It's the environmental result. And then there's 2 types of results that are similar to the cause. So one result is similar to the cause in experience. So an example of this is if you create a karma of violence, of killing, of harming others, then the karmic result of that's similar to the cause and experiences, you'll experience harm as well as illness or poor health in that way. So your experience, that karma ripens as an experience that's similar to its cause. And then the other type of karmic result, that's similar to the cause, is similar to the cause in habit. And really, of all the different karmic results, I think this is the most insidious. So what this means is, if I create the karma of killing in this life, and so I have this karmic imprint of killing, it ripens as the proclivity to kill again in the future, and for it to be easier for me to engage in that harmful action in the future. So it's similar to the cause and its habit. And the reason I think this is so insidious is because when we're looking at negative karma, especially, we're creating this negative feedback loop. The more we engage in negative actions, the easier it becomes to engage in those negative actions repeatedly. And we can just look at our lives and our very worldly kind of coarse examples to see that experiences that would support this, right? We know that anything we do regularly becomes easier and easier and takes less effort and less thought. And that's in both directions, for virtuous activity and non-virtuous activity. So that's one of the results of karma. So these 4 karmic results, every complete karmic act can have these 4 different results. So one action can have these 4 different types of results. And we have to consider that when we think about how important karma is and how karma plays a role in our experiences in this life. Because karma, all of our experiences, they say, is a result of our karma. So Kampa says, even the pleasure of a cool breeze on a hot day is due to karma. So that doesn't mean that the breeze itself is due to karma. What it means is our experience of that breeze as being a pleasant sensation is the ripening of virtuous karma in the past to have that pleasant experience. Because other beings might experience that exact same breeze as being unpleasurable, as being discomfort. So our experience of pleasure and displeasure are all ripening of different karmic imprints from the past. So when we think of this, it shows how karma itself is explaining everything we experience in the world. When we experience difficulties, we realize them as ripening of karma we created, whatever those difficulties may be. And when we experience joy or happiness, we recognize that as ripening of karma that met with the right conditions to ripen. So my happiness in this life may come from, I may have an experience of happiness that comes from meditating for many years and developing a mind of equanimity. And then based on that, I'm able to experience happiness in some way. So I had to do the work in this life to create the conditions, but it still required a virtuous karma from the past to ripen for me to experience that joy. So it's the combination of our causes and conditions in this life and previous karma we've created in the past. There are 4 important qualities of karma that we need to understand when we think about it. The first is that karma is definite, right? So what do we mean by that? We mean that a virtuous action will always yield a virtuous result, and a negative action will always yield a negative result. It's impossible for instance, if you plant apple seeds, they'll never grow an orange tree from those apple seeds. And in the same way, when you engage in a virtuous action, it's always going to have a positive result. So all of our experiences of joy and happiness in this life are the result of positive actions we engaged in the past. And in the same way, when we engage in non-virtue, it's always going to have a negative result. It's impossible for a non-virtuous action to bring about positive results because karma is definite. That's the first characteristic of karma. The next characteristic is that karma increases. And this is important because we think, well, I'm only doing these small things, so they don't matter at all. We say that karma increases, so even a small action, the karmic potentiality from that action will grow and grow and grow. And this is true for negative karma and positive karma. So, we may think that just killing insects or small animals doesn't really matter that much. It's not the same as killing a human being. And in that moment, it isn't. But the negative karma we accumulate, if we haven't done any work to purify it or halt it, it'll increase more and more and more. So even those small actions can have large results. But the same is true for our virtuous karma. So even if we don't have the means to engage in these big, elaborate activities of virtue, every small step we take towards Buddhahood, every time we turn our mind toward virtue and do some small practice, even if it's just watching our breath for 15 minutes every day with a virtuous intention, every small action can lead to a huge result because karma increases. The karmic, the ripening of karmic imprints increases and grows. The same way that it takes a small acorn to grow a huge tree, right? So although the action itself in this life may be small, the consequence can be much larger. So in addition to being definite and increasing, the third characteristic of karma is that we can't experience the result of a karma we did not create. So no matter how many virtuous actions I do, if I experience the ripening of a negative karma, that's still the karma I created. I can't experience your negative karma. I can't experience your virtuous karma either. So we can only experience the results of karma we've created. If we haven't planted the seeds, then it won't grow, no matter what the causes and conditions are. So if you haven't planted the seeds to develop an understanding and wisdom and patience and calm, then even if you're in the most blissful of environments, your mind still may be incredibly agitated because you haven't created the karmic imprint that would ripen into a joyful experience. And on the flip side, if you've many positive karmic seeds planted and you haven't negative karmic seeds, then even in difficult situations, right? Even when all of the causes and conditions would suggest you experience suffering and pain, instead you can experience happiness and peace and calm because you don't have the negative karma to ripen as the experience of suffering, regardless of the conditions. So we can't experience the result of a karma we ourselves did not create. This seems kind of contradictory how at the end of every practice we dedicate any merit, any good karma we've created to others, right? We can't give away our good karma. But by dedicating in that way, we develop a mind that wants to give away our good karma. We develop a mind that wants to have the positive results of our virtue ripen in other sentient beings. And that mind itself, that mind of dedication, is incredibly powerful. But we can't actually give it away. If we could, then the Buddhas would take all of our negative karma away from us. They would take all of our suffering and all of our experiences of suffering away. But it's not possible. We can only experience the result of a karma we ourselves created. And we can't experience the result of karma that another being created. And then lastly, the last of the important principles of karma is that a karmic imprint won't disappear on its own. It'll always ripen if it is intended to. And so again, this goes in both directions. If we create negative karma and we don't do the actions to purify those negative karmas, they will definitely ripen. Maybe not in this life, but definitely in one of our future lives, those negative karmas will ripen. If we do the practices to help eliminate those negative karmas, we can't actually, as ordinary beings, we don't actually eliminate the karma, but what we do is we neutralize it. We strip it of its power. So it's like burning a seed, they say. The seed is still there, but it has no capacity to grow into anything. So if we don't engage in those practices, then our negative karma actions will definitely bear negative results. And in the same way, when we engage in virtuous karma, that will definitely ripen into a positive experience unless we destroy that karma through minds of attachment or anger, right? So our positive karma can be destroyed in the same way our negative karma can be destroyed if we don't make effort to protect it and safeguard it. So karma won't disappear of its own accord. It can be neutralized or destroyed, but that is due to our actions. On its own accord, every karmic seed we plant will ripen, eventually. So it's important to understand these 4 aspects of karma, the 4 general principles, along with the 4 different type of karmic results. Because by understanding them, it lets us do 2 things. The first is to think about the future, and to think about how our actions in this life will be creating either happiness or suffering for ourselves in the future. How every action we do now is either going to bring us closer to Buddhahood, or it's bringing us deeper into samsara. Every single action. Because every action is associated with a karma. Every action of body, speech, and mind has a karma with it. And that karma will plant a seed, it'll have a karmic imprint that eventually will ripen. And if it's a virtuous action, it will definitely have a virtuous result, or a pleasurable result. So the first way we think about karma is thinking about the future. So that's the way understanding karma ensures that our life is one of virtue. Because when we have a deep recognition of karma, then we'll never want to engage in non-virtuous behavior. Because we'll always want to protect our future happiness, right? Our future Buddhahood. And the way we do that is by practicing virtue. And by avoiding non-virtue. So karma works forward in that way. When we think of karma and develop confidence in it, it works to help guide our actions in that way. It helps us avoid the 10 non-virtuous activities, right? And so the 10 non-virtuous activities, as we know, are the 3 of body, 4 of speech, and 3 of mind. So the 3 non-virtuous activities of body are killing, stealing, and engaging in sexual misconduct. The 4 negative actions of speech are lying, divisive speech, sometimes called slander, and then harsh speech, and then lastly, idle speech or gossip. And then 3 negative actions of mind are covetousness, and then malice or harmful intent, and then wrong views, which is to say, not believing in the law of cause and effect, or not believing that the teachings of the Buddha are authentic, or other similar types of wrong views. So these 10 actions are always negative. No matter what kind of wrapper we put them in, engaging in any of those 10 actions will always bring about some negative karmic imprint. Now, karma can be mixed. It's not all black and white. So we might have a really strong positive motivation, but we may still go about harmful activity. So that karma might be mixed in that way. So it might have some positive result and some negative result. That's a possibility. But in general, all 10 of those actions are always going to bring about negative experiences because they're always non-virtuous. It's impossible to engage in one of those 10 and not have it be non-virtuous. And not only will it have one result, as we said, there are 4 different types of karmic results. Projecting karma, environmental result, and then karma that the result is similar to the cause, both in experience and in habit. So any of those 10 negative actions will have, or has the potential to have 4 different results. When we understand this about karma, it helps guide our life to make sure our lives are lived in a meaningful way that's following the 10 virtuous actions, which is the opposite of the 10 non-virtuous actions. So the 10 virtuous actions are not simply not engaging in harmful activity, but it's actively and willfully not engaging in harmful activity. a karmic act has 4 different parts. So the first part is karasana, the basis, right? So the basis is the object against which you're engaging in this action. And then, in addition to the basis, there's the intention, which itself has 3 different components of recognition, motive, and accompanying delusion. And then there's the action itself and the completion of the action. So in order for a karmic act to be complete, it has to fulfill all 4 of those. And if it doesn't fulfill all 4 of them, then it's only a partial karma, so it's less powerful. So if we're thinking of the act of killing, right? The basis for the karma of killing has to be a being other than oneself. So that's the basis. And then the intention has 3 parts. The recognition is recognizing that other being as being separate or different or distinct from oneself. And then there's the motive, which is the wish to kill that being. And then there's the delusion, so that can be accompanied by any type of delusion. It can be accompanied by anger or ignorance or hatred. And then there's the action itself, so it's going through the action of killing that being. And then there's the completion, which is when that being dies before you do. So all of those components need to be complete to have a complete action of karma. Of killing. A complete karma of killing. And if they're not complete in all of those ways, then it's only a partial karmic act. You'll still have consequences, but they won't be as strong. And the same goes for virtuous karma. So when we engage in the act of not killing, it's not simply accidentally not killing, right? It's first recognizing the object, which is to say all other beings, as being objects of our action of non-killing. All beings, from the smallest, minutest animals or insects or sentient beings that are microscopic possibly, to the biggest sentient beings, to humans, to any type of being. They're all the objects of our act of non-killing. And then we have to have the strong intention or mind that says, I will not kill these beings. And then our action of non-killing is engaging with other beings in such a way that doesn't cause them to die. And that the completion of that action is the continued interaction with other beings in which we don't bring them harm or cause their lives to end. So it's not this passive experience of simply accidentally not doing a negative action. It's actively engaging in the opposite of that negative action. And so demonstrating those with the karma of killing is the easiest, but you can go through all of the 10 non-virtues: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, idle chatter or gossip, covetousness, malice, wrong views. You can go through all 10 and see that a complete karmic act has to have all of those components for it to have its full weight. And the same goes for the 10 the 10 virtuous activities. So we can create virtue and non-virtue incidentally, right? But it won't be as heavy. So when we kill insects by stepping on them without realizing they're there, there's still some small negative karma of killing, but it's not complete because there was no intention. There was no motivation. There was no delusion accompanying it. It was accidental in that way. But the action itself was still completed. So we still have the basis, which is a sentient being or a being other than ourselves. And we still have the action, which is that being died because of our actions. And we still have the completion, which is they died before we did. But we don't have that intention or any of its parts. And the action, again, focusing on killing as an easy example. If I tell someone else to kill on my behalf, that's still the act of killing from my side. And in fact, they say it's worse Because not only have I created negative karma of killing for me, but that other person who killed on my behalf has also created negative karma. So it's worse to have others do your dirty work in that way, because they're creating negative karma, but you still get that negative karma. So when others do that action on your behalf, you still accumulate that karma. That's still the action. So these are the general ideas we think about when we think about karma, is that it has 4 general principles, that it is definite, that it increases, that you can't experience a karmic result that you did not plant the seed for, and that karmic results, or karmic imprints rather, will not disappear of their own accord. And there are 4 different types of karmic results that every action can have. And every complete karmic act will have these 4 aspects of basis, intention, action, and completion. And so by understanding those, one of the ways karma improves our lives and makes our practice meaningful is it lets us think of the future to ensure that we only plant virtuous seeds in the future. And that's an incredibly important way that karma impacts our lives. We spend so much of our experience seeking out the pleasures of this life. Even though we say we're Dharma practitioners, we still seek out this life's pleasures because our self-cherishing mind is so deep, it's so, it's guided us for so long that we think of engaging in small harmful actions and we think, I won't have any immediate result from this. So therefore, we do it anyway, right? But when we think of how karma plays out over many lifetimes and how that small action might increase in size to have an outsized karmic result, then that motivates us to engage in virtue and to avoid non-virtue. So in every experience during the day, when something happens, when you experience something, before you react, you say, is my reaction creating a cause for happiness, or is it creating the cause of suffering? Through my engaging in the world, what causes am I creating? What seeds am I planting? So that's how karma, by looking at the future, karma helps make our action in every moment more virtuous, understanding karma. But the other way karma helps us, or understanding karma rather, is it lets us understand our experiences of this life in a more meaningful way. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when I experience a difficult situation, whether it be harm, whether it be someone insulting me, whether it be a physical ailment or a sickness that I develop, if my mind understands that this is only the result of negative seeds that I planted in the past, and this is the ripening of negative karma, then I don't have an automatic reaction of negativity. Even though I may experience physical discomfort, I recognize that as the natural result of my own actions, not as something coming from outside of me. Even if that discomfort comes from another being who's harming me in some way. When I recognize that it's my own actions in the past, whether it be this life or in past lives, that have caused this experience to ripen now, then it creates a new perspective, right? I stop feeling like an object that's being acted upon in the world, and I realize that I have an active role in my experience. I have an active role in my happiness, and I have an active role in my suffering. And even if it's actions that I engaged in many, many lifetimes ago that I have no memory of, it's still that same mental continuum of past lives, that's still karmic seed that I planted. Because I cannot experience the results of someone else's karma. And any negative experience I have is definitely the ripening of negative karma I've created in the past. So that lets me distinguish between something happening in my life and my experience of that thing happening, right? Because they're different. When I recognize that my experience is based on my negative karma or my positive karma,
from the past, then I have a healthier relationship with what is actually happening in the world around me. And that understanding and that recognition, having a healthy relationship with reality, as it were, is what lets me engage in a more virtuous life. It's what promotes living a life that is meaningful, right? A life dedicated to other sentient beings. A life dedicated to bringing happiness and joy and peace and well-being to all sentient beings, leading them out of samsara. But in order to find that motivation, in order to let it really infiltrate every moment of my experience, it's important that I'm not just reacting blindly. And when I experience pain, I think, woe is me. Why is this happening to me? Why are people out to get me? Why am I being criticized? Why are these harmful things happening to me? Those kind of minds just increase our self-cherishing, right? Those kind of minds don't help us in any way. But when we understand karma correctly and have confidence in it, those minds won't emerge because we'll have the natural recognition. This is a karmic result from an action I've done in the past. If it's a joyful result, then it's an opportunity to rejoice, right? If it's a very hot day and there's a cool breeze that brings us some relief from that heat, we can recognize my experience of relief when this breeze comes across is the result of a positive action I've done in the past. Even though it's a small karmic action ripening in this small result, just the pleasant experience that's the temporary relief from the suffering of heat, right? It's still, that pleasant experience is due to my past virtue. So I rejoice that in the past I engaged in virtuous activity. And that rejoicing encourages me to continue practicing virtue, right? Finding joy in virtue encourages us to continually and repeatedly engage in virtuous activity. So understanding karma well affects our lives in two main ways. One, it looks forward and it says, what can I do to ensure that all of my actions in this life are actions moving toward Buddhahood, towards happiness of myself and others, and not moving deeper into samsara? So understanding karma well controls our actions in that way. It helps us avoid non-virtue and engage in virtue. But it also looks backwards. And it says, why are my experiences in this life? Why are they what they are? Why do I experience joy or suffering the way I do in this life? That's because of my past actions. So understanding karma lets us look in two directions. And by doing that, it makes our lives more robust, more meaningful. It makes it so we don't have to contemplate, maybe this action is something I should or shouldn't do. We know right away, this action is only going to lead to suffering. And just as I'm experiencing suffering now due to my past negative karmic actions, I don't want to experience it for more in the future. I only want to experience joy and happiness. I only want to have a calm mind that lets me practice, that lets me help others, that brings me closer to Buddhahood. So therefore, even though this action may seem small and trivial, I recognize it as non-virtuous. I recognize that it can only have a non-virtuous result. It's impossible for it to have a virtuous result, and we naturally avoid that action. So karma helps us by looking in two directions in this way. But when we think of karma and we try to apply our understanding of it to our lives, it's also important to think of what karma is not, right? So karma is not luck. Karma is not chance. That we can understand pretty well. It's not probability. It's true that karma will only ripen when it meets the right causes and conditions. So even if we've created numberless positive karmas in the past, if we don't create the causes and conditions in this life for those to ripen, then they never will. But that doesn't mean that it's probability or luck. It means that it's us creating the conditions to encourage our virtuous karmic imprints to ripen, and to discourage our negative karmic imprints to ripen. So if we look at all those negative karmic deeds we've done in the past, whatever negative seeds we have in our mind, and we don't give them fertilizer or rain or sunshine, then they can't grow. So we can affect the causes and conditions to some extent, but to a large extent we can't, because we're born with these human bodies that are subject to change, subject to growing old, eventually die. So there are many things that we can't prevent. Just the fact that we exist in these conditioned bodies with these contaminated aggregates means that we are subject to experiencing suffering. So negative karma of suffering and pain is going to definitely ripen in our lives, whether it be in the form of illness or something else. But when we experience that, we can recognize this isn't just bad luck. This isn't just chance. This is the ripening of a karma I created in the past. And in fact, no matter how difficult this experience might be in this life, when we remember that every karmic act can have up to 4 results, including being born in what realm we're born in, the projecting result, or the result of throwing karma, we can realize that the experience of harm in this life, it's much better for a karma to ripen that way than for that karma to keep growing in strength until it ripens into even more difficult harm in the future, or it ripens into a negative rebirth in the future. So that way, even when we experience difficulties in this life, we realize that that is actually our negative karma ripening in a way that we can deal with it at a time and place that we can navigate it in a healthy way, as opposed to ripening at a time or place when we can't navigate it. So we can actually be happy that our negative karma is ripening now, when we have the tools and techniques and guidance to help us look at those negative or difficult experiences of suffering and then use them to propel us further on the path, instead of to drag us into minds of despair that just create more negative karma. But it's not luck or random, our experiences. Karma also, and this is probably most important, especially for convert Buddhists who come from other religious traditions originally, is that karma is not reward or punishment. That's important. Karma is not any being outside of ourselves giving us cookies for doing the right thing or making us sit in the corner for behaving badly. Okay? Karma is a natural law of cause and effect. So there's no judgment involved in karma. There's no playing favorites with karma. So it's not reward and it's not punishment either. It's just the natural result. If you stick your hand in a fire, it is going to burn and feel pain. That's the natural result of that action. In the same way, all of our experiences in this life and future lives are just the natural result of actions we've done in the past. It's not that we're being punished in some way, and it's not that others are being rewarded in some way. And so actually, this can be, when we actually realize this and we think about it, it makes it much easier for us to develop minds of compassion, especially for difficult people, right? When there are people we know, either in our intimate lives or just more broadly, and they are engaging in harmful action, we recognize that what they're doing is creating the seeds of more and more suffering for themselves in the future. That what they think they're doing is searching or finding happiness, right? They're seeking out happiness through using power or violence or abuse or any of these things. They want happiness. They want protection. They want comfort. But what they're doing is creating the causes for more and more suffering. Never mind the suffering of others that they're causing. They're causing more and more suffering for themselves. And so when we look at their actions and how harmful they are, we develop compassion towards them more easily, because we see all they're doing is creating the causes for future suffering. Inje. You know? And in the same way, we look at people or individuals who seem to be engaging in harmful action, yet they still have nice things in this life, right? They still enjoy wealth or prosperity or long health. And you say, why do these people who are so harmful, that have nothing but negative actions, or at least from our experience of them from the outside, yet they have wealth and they have a long life and they have power and they have popularity? Why is that? That's because in the past, they've created the causes for those to ripen. So they've created virtuous karma in the past. But we can also look at their experience of the results of virtuous karma and allow it to generate compassion, because we see, look at all these opportunities they have. Due to so much hard work in the past, they created virtuous karma. And these karmic imprints are ripening in this life as wealth, as power, as influence, as popularity. But instead of using that opportunity to help others, to create more virtuous karma, to be of benefit in the world, they're using it to harm others. So it's like taking, all this wealth and riches and then throwing it in the dumpster. Right? So they're taking the opportunity to have an incredibly meaningful life, and they're turning it around and making it one that leads them deeper and deeper into suffering in the future. So we look at others' experiences of wealth and joy and happiness, and that can also be a cause for us to develop compassion naturally. Or we look at those who have wealth or power in this life or influence and use it in a virtuous way, and that allows us to generate minds of rejoicing, right? So we can look, for instance, at people like Richard Gere, who is quite wealthy as an actor, yet he spends millions of dollars every year to help support the Dalai Lama touring the world and giving teachings. So he uses his privilege and his conditions of wealth and popularity and fame to benefit others by allowing the Dalai Lama to teach in other places around the world and by helping sponsor that. So we can rejoice in these positive actions he's doing. So he's seeing that his positive karma ripened into favorable conditions, and instead of letting those favorable conditions go to waste, he grabs onto them and uses them to create more positive karmic seeds. At least that's what it appears like from the outside. Karma itself is very subtle. It's one of the most subtle types of phenomena. So to be able to pinpoint this result I'm experiencing right now is a direct result of such and such an action in the past, that direct relationship, only Buddhas with omniscient minds can understand karma that directly. For us, we have to rely on some modicum of faith or confidence, because karma is so subtle. To understand every minute detail of it, you need an omniscient mind. So we can understand the broad understanding. By engaging in virtue, we experience pleasure. And when we look at others' actions, we can only observe them from the outside, so we don't know their actual minds. But based on our observations, we can make educated guesses, And when they engage in what appears to be virtue, we can rejoice. And when they engage in what appears to be harm, we can try to develop compassion. Because karma isn't reward or punishment. It is the natural result of actions done in past lives and in this life, ripening in this and future lives. And the last thing that karma is not is karma isn't passive. What I mean by that is when we experience difficult things in our life, or when we see others experiencing hardship, that is the result of negative karma. But it doesn't mean we just have to wallow in it and say, well, we deserve this because we created the causes in the past. Therefore, I'm just going to let this happen. That's a misunderstanding of karma. I remember once I was having a conversation with a translator who was a former monk, and I don't remember how the topic came up, but it came up about engaging in social welfare work for those who were experiencing poverty in some way, And he said, look, it's their karma to be born poor and to be born without material conditions. So that's not our fault. We don't have to do anything about it. That's such a wrong understanding. That's so incorrect. Yes, when people are born with difficult circumstances due to when they're born impoverished or born without material goods or with a lot of illness and so forth, that is their own karmic results ripening. Yet they're also born with the karma to be in relation to other sentient beings who may be able to help them. Right? That's also their karma. So if I can help another being, that's also the result of their karma in the past, their experience of benefit from me. So if I look at someone suffering and I have the means to help them in some way, whatever small way, and this is a worldly thing we're talking about, not a spiritual thing, but just a worldly benefit. The idea that I shouldn't help them because they're experiencing the negative results of their own karma is totally foolhardy, because they created the causes to come in contact with me in the past as well, and with whatever community or environment they're part of. That's also their karma. So therefore, that's not an excuse for me not to help others, just because their experiences of suffering are their own karmic imprints ripening. So karma isn't passive. Karma is always active. Karma is encouraging us to engage in virtue in this life and in future lives. Karma is saying that all of our experiences are due to past actions. That includes who we interact with, where we're born, what resources we have. So karma ripening and playing out isn't just a straight line, okay? It has many diverging lines. So we should never look at someone experiencing suffering and just say, that's their fault, they did a negative action, therefore they experienced suffering, end of story. Because if we have a means to alleviate that suffering in some way, we should pursue that means. Karma isn't passive. It doesn't just happen accidentally. Okay? It's something that we participate in all the time. So when we think about karma, these are the things to bring to mind in our everyday life, right? When we have an understanding of the different types of karma, or the different types of karmic result, rather, as well as the different components of a complete karmic action, and as well as the different characteristics of karma, it being definite and so forth. We bring those understanding first into our meditation, or first into our analysis, right? So when you first study karma, you say, do I really think this works the way it says it does? And you analyze in your life what your small experiences have been, as well as the different texts, what they say. And you look into this, and then slowly you develop some conviction. Okay, I understand in these teachings about karma, and I believe in them. I have some level of confidence in them. And then based on that, you meditate on karma. You meditate on how your experiences in this life are the result of actions in the past. And how that doesn't mean your experiences aren't valid. And it doesn't mean they're out of your control. It just means that you relate to them in a healthier way. You relate to them in recognition of what is really happening, as opposed to your projection of what is happening. You recognize that your experience is just that, right? And it's an experience. It's an interplay with reality that's co-constructing the reality that it's part of. It's not passively acted upon. And once you meditate in this way, then it becomes natural in your life to not engage in non-virtue, knowing they will never lead to your happiness, knowing that it'll only lead to your displeasure, discomfort. It'll only lead to more suffering and samsara. You stop seeking out samsaric pleasures naturally, because you realize they only lead to unhappiness. And then you have a healthier relationship with those experiences that do come up in your life, both positive and negative, because you don't experience them as if they were you being punished by some unseen hand, or as just bad luck or good luck. When positive things happen, we should rejoice in them. We realize, I did the work for this to happen. It took so much effort in the past for me to engage in virtue, plant the karmic seeds, to create the causes and conditions for me to experience whatever this moment of joy or happiness or pleasure is, that I shouldn't waste this moment. And I shouldn't waste all of my past effort. I should use this moment to propel myself closer to Buddhahood. So we see karma and the knowledge of karma working in these ways in our lives, the more we become familiar with it. So when we talk about practice, as being every moment of our life. That's why they say karma, or understanding karma, having confidence in the truth of karma, of cause and effect, is the root of all of our happiness in the future, because it guides all of our actions onto a virtuous path, one that is dedicated to benefiting others, serving others. And it allows us to experience all the negativities and sufferings in our life, not as things acted upon us from the outside, but as the ripening of our own past negative actions. And we can rejoice that they're ripening in such a time and place and way that we can deal with them, as opposed to ripening when we can't deal with them. And we have to do the work now. So when times get difficult, we already have the techniques in play. When you're sick and lying on your deathbed, it's not the appropriate time to start meditating on karma. It'll help, but it's better to do the work beforehand. When you're experiencing great suffering in this life, if you haven't done the work meditating on karma, having conviction in karma, then it's very difficult to look at that suffering and experience it with a mind that recognizes it for what it is. To not be overwhelmed by it, but to instead recognize that I am at this moment experiencing the result of the past negative karma. And even though it may be overwhelming or difficult in this life, even if it may take this current life away from me, it's ripening in such a way that is allowing me to continue to practice Dharma, as opposed to ripening as rebirth in a hell realm or a lower realm, or rebirth in a condition where I have no means to practice Dharma. So even though it's a negative experience now, it's ripening in such a way that I can deal with it. It doesn't have to affect my mind. It's no judgment upon me. It's no punishment against me. It's the natural result of past actions that are ripening at a time when I have the mind that can navigate it in a healthy way. And the same goes if you experience good things. When you experience some level of fame or popularity, whenever you experience favorable conditions, you realize that yes, these conditions, whatever it may be, popularity, fame, is because of work I've done in this life, right? I've helped create the conditions for this to come about. But it's also due to the ripening of past positive actions I've done. So I can't let others, their opinions of me, whether it be fame, popularity, success in my job, any of these things, I can't attribute that only to my experiences in this life. So it can't let my ego get inflated. So there's no reason for my self-cherishing mind to continually search out these things, because it is the result of past actions I've done. And so instead, I recognize that and say, how can I use this to move myself closer to Buddhahood, instead of letting it feed my self-cherishing mind or my ego? So whatever our experience in this life, experiences of joy or experiences of displeasure or suffering or pain, they all can be understood through the lens of karma. And by doing that, it encourages us to continue practicing the Dharma in a meaningful way. And the more we do that, we realize our life becomes easier. Right? The more you practice actively following the 10 virtuous activities, life becomes easier. You create less obstacles for yourself. And when obstacles do arise, you have a mindset that allows you to approach those obstacles in a healthy and meaningful way, as opposed to being overwhelmed by those obstacles. We have about 15 minutes left. Maybe are there any questions you'd like to end with? Yeah, I think I see a hand raised. Go ahead.
Unmute yourself, Karen.
Wait. Sorry. Okay. Hi. I had the note on an email. Here we go. Okay. So, in the arts world, whether it's literary or music or artistic, there's the role of the critic.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the New Yorker reviews, we look at the New York Times, whatever, here in America anyway. And where does criticism fit in terms of harsh speech or divisive speech on that continuum?
So a teacher says, any words that are spoken, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, if they're not spoken with a mind of benevolence, would be included in the categorization of harsh speech. So harsh speech has to do with our intention. So if you are engaging in art criticism and you're doing it for the purpose of helping others have greater appreciation of that art and helping the artist or the creator improve their art, and you only have a positive mind that isn't chasing one of the 8 worldly dharmas, right? That isn't trying to be harmful, then that wouldn't qualify as harsh speech, even if you are pointing out flaws in what they've done. I mean, it's hard to say there are flaws in art, but you know what I mean. But in the same way, even if you lavish praise on someone, if you're doing it with a mind that is actually wishing them to be embarrassed or harmed or in some way a negative mind, that would still be categorized as harsh speech. So it's the intention that is the motivating factor, whether speech is harsh or not.
But what
The
if the
difficulty. Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
what if the consequences of these comments, if they are negative, have you know, a bad effect on the production or the writer
Mhm.
or the creator?
Well,
Then
then, then it comes to the point where you have to, as the person engaging in those comments, you have to weigh, is this the most skillful way for me to engage with this piece of art? So if I live my life as a critic, like professionally, then I have to decide, is me making these comments, even if I have the best of intentions, if it can cause others to lose their livelihoods or to experience difficulties in some way, is that a meaningful way to engage in criticism and to live my life? You know?
right,
And if your intentions are only pure, then and you actually can analyze, my intentions aren't involved with my ego. There's no sneakiness coming in from the backside. Then it can be a helpful way, a meaningful way to live your life. But you have to see, is this the most skillful thing I can do? Or if you're criticizing something, how is the skillful way to point out that same criticism in a way that doesn't cause as much harm if it's possible? So you have to use your wisdom combined with your discriminating wisdom that says, is this the most skillful thing I can be doing? And is this actually benefiting? You know? And so it's I'd say it's a difficult position to be in. I think if you're talking about the arts in particular,
yeah,
and we look at how the art scenes have moved and evolved through time and history, that criticism is a part of creating art in the world, right? And part of what causes art to grow is its reaction to what's happening. And so criticism is in like a healthy dialogue with the creation of art in general. That's just part of what it means to create art in the world. So in that way, you can recognize that participating in the act of criticism is part of this continuing dialogue of how the art scene develops and grows and changes. And so if you're doing it as skillfully as possible with a benevolent mind that's wishing to benefit others, then it doesn't have to be harsh speech. But you have
mhm,
to be skillful, you know?
yeah. Good response. Thanks.
I think I saw Kathleen
Kathleen?
had a question.
Thank you for your teachings, Venerable. So when our karmic seeds ripen in this lifetime, and we have either virtuous or a positive or negative experiences in this life, are those karmic seeds necessarily from actions of past lives, or
Mhm.
can we plant karmic seeds in this life that ripen in this life?
Both. We can definitely plant karmic seeds that ripen in this life. Most of our most of our karmic seeds are from past lives. Insofar as we can say we had numberless past lives to create both positive and negative karmic seeds. And in this life, we've only had this one life up till now. But so in that way, we have this idea that probably most of them come from the past. Yet our actions in this life still affect the future of this life. So both happen. And we can see that in very worldly ways. Like we can understand cause and effect. When we're trying to get used to karma and the understanding of it, we can look at worldly examples in that, I engaged in however many years of study, and then as a result of that, I gained some knowledge and was able to be employed in the field that I wanted to be employed in, right? So we can see a cause and result. That's not karma. That's just normal cause and result. But we can use that as an example upon which to develop our mind of karma. So in the same way, we can say that actions in this life will ripen as positive results in this very life. But it's hard for people without high levels of realization or understanding to pinpoint that to be the case, you know? But it is possible, 100% possible. Okay.
Bill?
I think William.
Thank you. Yes, I think I have a good sense of an ability to more easily understand karma personally than I do for other people. And I was thinking of examples being like child abuse, genocide, like in the Holocaust, and then the current war in Gaza and Ukraine. The inference, as I understand it, is that those individuals that are dying and getting hurt, that's a result of a bad karmic seed ripening. But on the other hand, that doesn't seem right. I don't know how to express this, but
No, I understand. I understand.
naive here, but it's just something there's a disconnect between personally and then looking out and seeing how others are responsible for.
No, I understand. You know, one of the difficulties when talking about karma is it can very easily start to feel like victim blaming, right? And you say you're experiencing that harm, it's your own fault. You did something wrong in the past. So it's helpful to start focusing on yourself. Like that's a great place to start and develop conviction in that. Then when you look at others, you have to think of how does understanding the role karma plays in their lives benefit your ability to interact in the world? So when we look at, for instance, you know, I mean, karma, we use karma as, we understand karma to be the reason bad things happen to good people, right? They may not have done anything in this life that would warrant experiencing suffering the way they are now. That's why, children die every day, right? Some die before they're born. That would be the result of negative karma. They didn't do anything in this life they didn't plant the seed for that in this life. So the way we use it when we look at others is to make sure that A, we're not blaming others. We're not saying it's their own fault that they are experiencing this in such a way that it dismisses our role, right? Because again, karma only ripens when it has the right causes and conditions. So when looking at others' experiences of suffering, thinking of how their past actions brought about that suffering is only useful insofar as it can help you develop compassion for them, and it can encourage you to see what relationship you have with them to help bring about their future happiness and to resolve their suffering as much as you can. If your understanding of karma causes you to look at others and say, good, they get what they deserve, that is the opposite of karma, of a good understanding of karma, rather. That would be what we call a negative rejoicing, right? So when we look at, for instance, dictators who are killed. So I remember like when Osama bin Laden was assassinated, it was very important in Dharma centers to talk about not rejoicing in the death of a human being, in the murder of a human being. Even though we can be joyful that some level of whatever harm he may have caused in the future would no longer come about, and we've created more positive environment for people to live. We can rejoice in that. But if you actually are rejoicing in the harm he experienced and his death, that is actually one of the 10 non-virtues. It's a mind of malice, right? So we can't rejoice in others' experience of negative karma. We can't rejoice in others' suffering or discomfort. And so when we see others suffering, whether we think they quote unquote deserve it or not, we recognize that as the ripening of their negative karma, and that compels us to have compassion on them. But this is also where skillful means come in, insofar as, so we're having a Buddhist discourse right now, so we can have this kind of talk. But if I were to go out on the street and see an unhoused person who's begging for food, who doesn't have shelter, and I say, well, you shouldn't be unhappy that you're unhoused. It's just the ripening of your own karma. That's not going to help them at all, right? That's of no benefit to them. So these teachings help us transform our minds to understand our lives better, and we can look at the suffering of others as a way to inform how we live in the world. But then putting those teachings in our mouths to share with them isn't always useful. So the teachings of karma are to help us transform our minds and to understand how we exist. And we see other people's experiences, both virtuous and negative, and understand it to be their karma ripening, not in a way that's judging them, but in a way that's being realistic, right? In a way that's looking at the suffering of others. For instance, if we look at the 10,000 plus civilians who've died in Gaza right now, we look at their suffering, and we don't say it's their own fault. We don't say it's because they're bad people, but we recognize that it's not from nowhere, right? Suffering doesn't happen with no reason at all. And that allows us to develop the confidence that we don't want to create the causes for suffering in the future. Because even if we don't see the causes in this life, it still has a cause. So when we look at other suffering, especially mass, large events of suffering, large scale suffering, even, never mind wars, just think of suffering of natural disasters, right? Suffering of, just recently there was a large earthquake in Nepal, which was like the second largest in, I think, a decade or something. And hundreds of lives lost and, towns and infrastructure destroyed. That's not because they deserve it, right? But they've created some causes in the past, however many past lives, and they're experiencing it now. And so that doesn't cause us to belittle them or to cast judgment on them. What it does is it allows us to develop compassion for them and to ensure that we live our lives in such a way that we aren't planting the negative seeds that would ripen in that way for us. I don't know if that helps. It does. Karma can feel very victim blaming, and it can feel much like it's pushing others away. So when you think about karma, you have the sensation that what you're doing is pushing others away from yourself. Then maybe step back and try to only focus on karma as it affects you immediately, and then slowly build outwards, right? It doesn't have to be all or nothing from the beginning. We start with what is comfortable, and then we push on our boundaries until our understanding grows. So if thinking about karma when others experience suffering causes you to feel distance from them and feels wrong, it feels like you're blaming the victim, then don't start there. Start with what is beneficial to your life and to your practice. And then in your meditation, you can contemplate karma more. And by doing that, develop a stronger conviction in how it works and how understanding it can generate or be a cause for generating compassion and virtuous activity. And then as that understanding deepens, then you can expand how you relate to others' experiencing of karma. Does that help a little?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
It is true, though. It's very easy to allow karma to be dismissive, It's one of the few things that irks me a lot whenever in like pop culture, when something bad happens, I'm like, oh, that's your karma. And, even non-Buddhists or non-people coming from traditions that believe in karma use the idea of karma as being like revenge or payback or what you deserve, right? It's used that way in pop culture. And that's a non-beneficial way to think of karma because it's inaccurate. So if you ever start thinking of it in that way, you can take a step back, Susan, I think.
Suzanne, want to unmute?
Yes, thank you,
Suzanne.
Venerable.
Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I related to what William was talking about. It made me think of the concept of collective karma as I understand it. And then I wondered about, well, what is the relationship of collective karma to individual karma? Let's say the collective national karma, because of decisions one's government has made, perhaps without the consent of the people or the majority of the people, the government. So anyway, it brings this national trauma, like genocide that a nation commits. Our own country has done that. And so what is the relationship between that karma that comes down on the country and the individuals interacting within it in their own individual karmas?
Hmm. When we talk about collective karma, it it's karma you've created with other beings in a place, right? So we can say that, just as an example, all of the in the past have created the karma to be part of those communities. So, or even as an, I created the karma in the past to be born in America. So the collective actions or experiences of American citizens is a result of that collective karma. So it's not that the government's making decisions on my behalf that I may or may not agree with, and that is my karma. But my karma is the environment I'm born into. And generally, we're born with people that we've created karma with in the past, right? So we could say that, even here's a smaller example. We would say that the chances are, in past lives, all of us, the however many of us are here together, have created karma together, because that's what's bringing us together in this moment right now. So there's some collective karma we've created as a group that has related to one another, that is allowing us to come together and have this experience together right now. So that's a type of collective karma. We all individually created it, but we created it together. So if you look at a country who's experiencing suffering, or let's say in Nepal, they experience this earthquake. In the past, they all created the karma together to be born in that community, in that environment. And this earthquake and this experience of group suffering, right, on a large scale, isn't the result of any one person in that group or community, but all of them are experiencing the karma they've created together to cause that event to happen. Or not to cause it to happen, but to cause their experience of it to happen in that way, right? So collective karma doesn't mean that I'm experiencing the karma that you may have created just because we're in community together. It's still something I created in the past, but it's an action I did in relationship to you and many others that brings us together, so we experience the results in a simultaneous way. So that's how kind of collective karma works. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, it does. It helps a lot. Thank you very much.
It's important to remember, if we remember the 4 rules of karma ripening, the internet karma in India is always a little bit sketchy. You never know how it's going to go. Yeah, so there's always a lot more we can say, but let's just end with the dedication. I don't know how far I got before we were disconnected. Sorry about that. So let's just recognize that we created virtue in the beginning by setting a strong motivation, and hopefully we created some virtue in the middle by engaging in a Dharma discussion together. And now we want our practice to be virtuous in the end by dedicating that merit so that all sentient beings might experience the bliss and happiness of Buddhahood and may be free from all suffering. And so we dedicate our merit, anything we've accumulated through our practice today, to benefit all sentient beings. And we can recite these 2 verses of dedication together. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious Supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore.
Thank you so